Hey everyone, nice to have you back. Thanks for joining me again on, I think this is the 5th time we've done the live session on the Facebook page. And man, I just get great responses all the time, and I'm so happy to be here doing this. All right, let's talk about some things that we have going on here. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about autocross, and there's Paul Sexton. And you can always count on Paul Sexton to hop right in. Nice to see you, Paul. I've got something I want to talk to you about, Paul, specifically. You know what I'm talking about. We'll get to that a little bit later. So we're going to be talking about the cam class in autocross, and we're going to be talking about aerodynamics that go along with it. Hey, Marty Davis, nice to see you there. Sorry about the pic, phone crashed out. That's okay, man. I'd love to see it eventually. Shoot it over to me again. Nice to see you, Marty. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so we're going to talk about autocross and aerodynamics. I'm getting all tongue-tied up here. And we're also going to be talking about how to get your coilovers adjusted. Man, I have so much to say about that. That's one of those like weird places in racing where people tend to get stuck because there's just too many things happening. And at the end, we're going to be talking about how can you use indoor karting against the clock to help improve your racing techniques, and we will get to that. But let's jump back to the beginning. Hey, there's Calvin. Nice to see you, Calvin. I love to see you stopping in. I think you've been to pretty much all of these now, man. Nice to see you. I hope everything's going really well for you, my man. All right, let's jump right on into this. I've got you guys trained to say hi right at the beginning. That's really cool. Right, so, and I know you guys are out there racing. At this point, you're probably racing more than I am because I'm loving the business stuff so much. So if you have anything you want to add during any time, just throw it right into the comments. I'm sure everyone, it's so cool. Everyone has such unique insight about something. And actually, more people are writing for the website now. That's really exciting. And I love having other people's opinions and insights about stuff. So your insight is valuable to me. And hey, is that Carissa Parlin? My friend Carissa. It's nice to see you on here. I know you don't even like racing, so it's nice for you to stop in. All right, check this out. So let's jump right to Classic American Muscle Autocross. And I've got one here from, I don't know who it is specifically. He runs the IGY6 Motorsports Facebook page. And he has a pretty long question. We're going to read it right here, right now. He says he's got a 2001 Corvette Classic American Muscle Autocross car. He says it'll take a 6-inch Lexan spoiler, and will that be worth it for improvements on small to mid-sized courses? Nice. That's nice of you, sweetheart. It's nice to see you. I see many of the top names with Corvettes running with these Lexan spoilers, but to an intermediate skilled driver, are there really any advantages to this? Oh man, I have a lot to say about this. So right from the get-go, I would say that if you are running a small to mid-size autocross course, there was probably zero benefit to having any kind of aerodynamic downforce. I mean, and there's a lot of ways we can go with this, but I think one of the most important factors here, and I think this also applies in Classic American Muscle across all the other modifieds, is that yes, you can have a 6-inch deck spoiler on the back, but they don't allow you to add plates on the side of it. And having those plates on the sides, what creates an air dam to keep air from rushing off the side. You know, you've seen those, some airplanes, they have like the long wings, but then at the end they have like the tips that roll up. That's to help keep air from rushing off the ends, and that helps aerodynamics in many different ways depending on the situation. But in this case, autocross is like 90% cornering, right? Okay, autocross is like 90% cornering. So if you don't have air dams on your rear spoiler, then the air is just rushing off to either side all the time. You're not really catching any of it. And it's kind of the same thing with what are they called? Splitters, which is the little spoiler you put under the front bumper at the front of the car. I know the rules are pretty limited on those as well. And you've probably seen like a Pikes Peak race car, right? A Pikes Peak race car's got like an 18-inch splitter on the front of it, and that's to help front end downforce. But in autocross, you're not really allowed to go very far past the factory bodywork, so you're really not gaining anything on that. You know what I'm saying? I think the other thing to consider here too is that yes, there is a very small potential for aerodynamic improvement if you're at a national level, you're racing a very fast course. But even then, I think it's probably only worth maybe 1.5% of potential improvement. So unless you've done everything else you can do to the car up to that point, I don't think it's worth it. So if you're thinking about doing some type of aero, some type of downforce in your autocross car, I would tell you to do it in this order. Make sure you have the best tires you can get. And I'm just going with a classic American Muscle example because that's what IGY6 Motorsports Facebook page, the guy who sent me this, that's what he's running. And I know that in Classic American Muscle, you can only have a 200 UTQG treadwear rated tire. That's the softest rubber compound you can have in that race car. So if you don't have a 200 treadwear tire, you're definitely missing out. That's the thing you need to be focusing on, okay? And it should be, if it doesn't say RE71R on the side, Paul Sexton backed me up on that. I know we talked a lot about that a while ago, how it totally brought your car to life. If it doesn't have RE71 stamped on the side, it's not the right tire. Go get RE71Rs. That's your main focus to be faster. Once you have the right tire, people are all about, all right, what can I throw at the car next? No, you don't need to go there yet. You need to make sure that you have that tire tuned properly. And what I mean by that is you need to make sure you have maximized that tire's potential contact patch. So if you have too much pressure in the tire, you don't have the right contact patch. If you don't have enough pressure in the tire, you don't have the right contact patch. Paul Sexton, there he is. He says, Bridgestones are the bomb diggy. Boy, we're really showing our age here, man. I used to say that in middle school. Thanks for keeping it alive. I love that. Okay, so get the right tires. Make sure you have the right tire pressures, and you can tune those with some type of pyrometer and getting temperature readings. I'm not going to talk about that here. We talked about that in session 1 of the live session. That's new. Well, that's weird. I just saw an emoji flash across my screen. I don't know how that happened. I wonder who did that. Whatever. Okay, so make sure you have the right tires. Make sure your tires are optimized for tire pressure, okay? Because the next step is suspension tuning. And if you can do all the suspension tuning in the world and spend thousands of dollars, but if you don't have the tire's potential grip maximized, you're basically wasting your money, okay? So at that point, and we're still going with the classic American Muscle example here, at that point you need to be spending high dollars on a really well put together suspension kit. I'm talking, if you have a Mustang, you definitely, Carissa says it was her, it's not new. I'm just Facebook illiterate. Oh, well, thanks for calling me out. I appreciate that. We'll have to talk later. Why are you still watching? I mean, okay, all right, whatever. Okay, where was I? Right, so high-end suspension kits. This is something you're definitely wanting to do in Classic American Muscle because the biggest problem that these heavy cars have is that they have a really tough time changing direction, and that's what the suspension can do for you. So you want to get into a really high-end kit. You don't want to try and build your own or spend cheap money. We're going to talk about cheap suspension setups a little bit later in the live session when we talk about adjustable coilovers. I have a lot to say about that. But at this point, you want to be if you have a Mustang, you definitely want to be buying something that says, oh, who is it? Is it Maximum Motorsport? That's the company that can turn your Mustang into a absolute shredding machine. Like, that is the best thing you can do for your Mustang. If it's a GM or if it's a Mopar, you definitely want to buy something that says Hotchkiss on the side because those are really the two premier muscle car suspension tuning companies. And this is where I'm going with this. If you don't have the right tires, you don't have the tires tuned properly, and you don't have a proper suspension setup, don't even think about aero. Because like I said, aero is only worth like 1.5% potential improvement, but suspension is like probably 30%. And tires are easily 40 to 50%. So it doesn't make sense to focus on the wrong thing first. It is the very last step. And I would make the case that it's a step that doesn't even need to be taken to be competitive. I know it looks super cool. You want to get that splitter on there. I get it, but you're wasting money and you need to make sure you have the other things going first. All right, cool. So wrapping that one up, I see we've got several people on still right now. If you haven't said hi in the comment box, please do. I'd like to introduce myself, especially if you're new. Just say hey and tell me what you got going on. If you have any questions during this, put them right in the comment box. We'll try and get to them by the end of the session. If you think of one later that you don't think of now, go to racershq.com/ask and submit your question. Ah, that was so smooth. See what I did there? Crushed it. On the side, a really cool thing happened this weekend. There's Rick Staley. Dude, Rick, nice to see you again. You and I are going to have to get together. I miss driving your FRS. More comments. More comments. Hang on. Right on, cool. Yeah, okay, he says, Mohammed says, I've been tweaking chassis suspensions for over a year, and every part added changes the whole car. That's true. So if you're going to put a new suspension on it, you're going to have to go back and make sure your tire pressures are good, your camber angles are good. Great point, man. I'm glad you brought that up. Once you have something fixed, it's never done. Once you change another thing, you've got to start over and get your tuning to go back. So, a really cool thing happened over the weekend. Yes, the Humble Little Racers HQ podcast has over 20,000 downloads now. Really exciting to have that. And of course, that is all thanks to you guys. All I do is just get up there and talk in front of a microphone, which is pretty easy because I'm both knowledgeable and opinionated. So getting great feedback about that. I get several emails a week from people who say, I love what you're doing with the podcast, great information. So if you're not listening, highly recommend that you do. It's got great reviews. And if you're new to it, you can check that out by going to racershq.com/pod. For technical reasons, I couldn't put the word podcast. We'll talk about it later. Boy, I'm really sucking the time down here. All right, let's see here. Let's move on to the next one. This one's from Andrew Martinez. There's Marty Davis again. Mazda had an iRacing team simulator set up at Road America. MX-5 simulator, wicked cool. Yes, I love iRacing. I could talk about that all day, and sometimes I do. Sorry if you've heard me do that multiple times, but it's one of my favorite things ever. Marty, if you're not dirt racing in iRacing, do it tonight. I want you to get the Dirt Street stock car, go to Speedway International USA, and just let it hang out on dirt. You will learn a lot about driving, a lot about rotation, a lot about weight transfer. Highly recommended. Go do that tonight. Sign my name to that. Okay, moving on. I got this from Andrew Martinez. He shot me an email, and he's got a lot of stuff going on. We've been chatting for quite a while now, and he says, and I love this first part, he says, say I got my tire pressures correct first. Man, he totally gets it. He knows the proper order of operations for tuning your car. Marty says he's on it. Cool, man. Get back to me. Shoot me an email. Facebook, whatever. I think we've been chatting via Facebook. Let me know how that goes for you. I'm interested. Andrew says, say I get my tire pressures correct. How would I go about adjusting my coilovers? Oh boy. Oh boy. Now we're going to talk about custom suspension components and tuning and coilovers. By the way, Andrew, if you're here, say hi. I want to shout you out and make sure you're listening here. I have a lot to say about this. The first thing I will say about this is I normally don't recommend that people buy coilover suspension components because it complicates everything. Everyone thinks they need a coilover kit to go fast. Everyone seems to think that having stiffer springs is how the car corners better. That's not true. We're going to talk about it a little bit more in a minute. Oh yeah, Mohammed says, going to have to bust out the Logitech G27 seat. Racing seat. Dude, I have a Logitech G27. That's what I use on iRacing. That seems to be the standard. I know Paul's got something else. I can't remember what it is, but the G27 seems to be standard. Glenn McGee uses it. He's the gang boss of iRacing, whatever, so. Here's the problem with having, if you're one of those people who thinks that just stiffer springs is the answer, that's not true. You can't just add stiffer springs because, for example, you have to make sure that your spring rate is matched to the shock, okay? So the spring has to be able to compress enough and uncompress enough to account for any inconsistency in the road surface. Rick Staley, G920 here, I've heard of that one, never used it. Thanks for the insight on that, that's pretty cool. The spring has to be able to allow the tire to roll over an imperfection and come back down it without Aaron Flynn. Are you still in Tennessee? Hit me up sometime, Aaron Flynn. We got chat. Man, there's so many people talking. So the spring has to be able to compress and uncompress and let the tire remain contacted with the driving surface as it goes over an imperfection. The problem with stiffening your spring without changing the shock is that you're basically turning that imperfection into a little ramp, a little launch pad, and the tire will actually go up the beginning part and actually leave the driving surface. Paul Sexton, Logitech Driving Force GT. Thank you, my man. And that's bad because you want that tire to be in contact on the driving surface all the time. If it's not, your car's going to be really twitchy. What's going to happen when you're going around a slight bend and then your tire hops off the ground for a second? What's going to happen when it touches back down? You don't know. So that's something you definitely want to avoid. Stiffer springs is not the answer. The answer is this. You have to make sure that the spring rate is matched to the shock, okay? So the spring has to be able to move enough, but the shock has to be able to make sure that the spring returns back to its original position extremely efficiently, right? That keeps the car from bouncing too much or being too stiff. So you're fighting stiff springs and you're fighting soft springs. That's what the proper combination is for. I was on Google today looking up something, and I just happened to see in the little side panel where they have ads and stuff, I saw that some company was selling a total coilover kit for $350. it was like nails on a chalkboard for me. I have a giant chalkboard. It's awesome. It was like nails on a chalkboard for me because there is no way that thing is worth anything. It's not worth a penny. So anyone looking at something like that, cheap money, I mean, it's definitely not the way to go. What they're doing there is they have one set of shocks, one set of springs. They're not changing the rates or anything. They're just changing the mounts on them so you can bolt them into your car, but there's nothing there to match the weight of your car, what you have going on. So you're literally guessing. There's no science involved in that whatsoever. You'll never be able to adjust that package to fit your car. That being said, if you're going to spend money on a coilover system, which I don't recommend, I'll talk about that in a second. I hate coilovers. I think they're silly. If you're going to spend money on them, you'd better be spending at least $1,500 to $1,800 because anything less than that is going to be garbage. And I know there are some pretty good competitive prices out there, but I promise you it's not worth it. Here's why. Why do you think a set of good Bilstein shocks is $700? Calvin Gillick says, while there are great values out there, a lot of time you get you get what you pay for. Thanks for adding that. Definitely true. It's for looks, for performance, says Paul Sexton. Totally agree with that. 100%. So here's why Bilstein shocks are so expensive. And like Calvin says, you get what you pay for. But here's why. They spend millions and millions and millions of dollars finding out what's the best shock that can possibly go on a car. Like, for example, and they can get you anything. If you don't know what you're doing, first of all, you shouldn't own coilovers, and you certainly shouldn't install them because you don't know how to adjust them or anything like that. So you're really just wasting a whole bunch of time and effort, and we'll come back to that in a second too. But call someone at Bilstein. They're the experts. You're going to say, look, I got a BRZ. I have to retain this factory spring because I'm in street class, whatever. They're going to say, okay, good. We have a performance shock that's specifically designed for not only the front of the car, but the back as well, because a BRZ is not perfectly balanced. So the front shocks are going to be, they're going to be valved differently. They're going to have different jounce and rebound characteristics than the rear ones, okay? And they know all this stuff, so you can say, look, I have the factory spring, I haven't dropped it, and I need to know what's going to be best. They're going to say, not a problem at all. Here's the shock you need because we've spent millions of dollars figuring out which one is best, and then we made it exactly for that car, that situation. If you call them 3 weeks later, say, look, I found a really high quality set of springs that I think is going to be really good. They're the Toyota TRD springs. They're specifically designed for the BRZ and the FRS. The guy at Bilstein is going to say, no problem at all, my man. I got a shock that's specifically designed for a 1-inch drop, and it's designed for those new set of springs that you're putting on with those spring rates, right? So trying to buy a crappy kit, that's what you get. You're getting garbage. That's why things are so expensive. And that's why it's so complicated to try and put together your own kit, because people don't account for this kind of thing, right? There's Eric Brush, Coney yellow shocks, H&R springs, easy on the wallet and effective. That's a really potent combination for you autocross guys out there. Coney yellows are awesome. Eric, back me up or correct me. I think that those are adjustable as well. So they do give you some leeway as far as how you want the front of your car to react based on whatever you like. And that's the other thing. I'm glad Eric brought this up. That's the other thing. If you're dead set on having a set of coilover shocks, whatever, you're really complicating your life. Yes, adjustable, says Eric. Thanks for confirming that. Rick Staley, Bilstein and TRD. Dude, that's awesome. I'm glad you threw that in there. That's exactly what I was just talking. I just pulled that off the top of my head, but Rick obviously knows what he's doing. He's not messing around with weird adjustments or trial and error. He went right to the big dogs who said, yep, you're going to need this, and you're going to need this. They're designed exactly for this car. And I've driven that FRS. There is more drool on that FRS from me than any number of babies in the whole world could drool ever, because that is the best car I've ever driven in my life. I can't wait to get back in that seat, man. Let's get together sometime. Man, I just went off on another tangent. Where was I going with that? Right. If you decide to go with the coilovers, I love the emojis going across here. That's so funny. Yeah, she's right. I am Facebook illiterate. I'm gonna have to do some reading on this. Oh boy. All right. Anyway, man, I keep sidetracking myself. I have so much I want to talk about. Where was I at? Right. If you're intent on getting the coilovers, fine, you can, but you're really complicating your life because Carissa Parlin says, "I love the stuff that comes out of your mouth." Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. I'll come back to these later. There's too many comments now. Oh, goodness. You're complicating your life if you decide to go with the coilovers, because now you've added something that the factory or the Bilstein and the TRDs, using the BRZ example, you're adding something that those things don't account for, and that's ride height, and that's a big deal. So if you have to account for ride height, I mean, there are some more options. Like people want to, and I know that's why Andrew asked me this, because he wants to know, okay, how do I take my coilovers and make them amazing, like perfect? Like, what do I do? What are the steps? And I'm like, there aren't any. There are no magic steps, you know? Like, and I guess the most tactical thing that I could suggest to you is that I know some people like to get close by, putting their car on a set of scales, and you'll be able to see, if the front end is heavier, if the left rear is heavier, and because you can adjust each individual ride height, you can sort of balance it out a little bit, which is cool. But I mean, if you put a Mazda Miata on a set of scales, you're going to be good to go, because those things are pretty much, perfectly balanced out of the factory. But I mean, corner balancing is not always the answer. If you've got I know there are some El Caminos out there, going back to the classic American muscle example. I know there are some El Caminos out there that you can fit big blocks in, which is legal in that class, and have rear springs, so you could technically put a set of coilovers on it. But if you did, the front end would be so heavy. There's no way you could ever corner balance an El Camino on a set of scales. So I mean, you can try and get close, I guess, like that, but I mean, corner balancing isn't the answer. Like, I was talking to him, on a Facebook thread earlier in the week, and then somebody popped in and said, oh yeah, you need to corner balance the car. I'm like, I mean, I guess that's a good starting point, right? But where do you go from there? And like I said, that'll get you close, but that doesn't account for anything about how you want the car to handle. The way I drive a car is totally different than the way Paul Sexton drives a car. And the difference is that, I mean, shoot, do you want the car to have more natural oversteer? Okay, I mean, I guess that's fine. You're just gonna, and that's cool about scaling, is you can actually see where the weight is. You can actually raise the rear up, lower the front, and of course, with less weight over the rear, there's less grip over the rear, and when you turn the car into a corner, yeah, you're gonna get some natural rotation, some natural oversteer. I like that kind of thing. So, and of course, the opposite is true. If you don't like that, you're going to want to go the other way. But I mean, the variables are almost infinite on something like this. Say you're at Lime Rock Park. It's a very right-hand dominant track, So I mean, natural intuition would tell someone, well, okay, I guess if it's right-hand dominant, then you might as well lower the right side of the car a little bit, and help counteract some of the weight transfer as it goes toward the outside as you're going around all the right-hand corners. I don't know. Is that something you can account for? Maybe, but as soon as you go to another place, this left-hand dominant, I mean, variables are infinite. So there is no magical answer to coilovers. That's why I hate them. I think that there are a lot of people producing really low-end kits just to make a buck, which really bums me out. And my best advice to you is just stay away from them altogether. I mean, if you really want it, fine. But I mean, there's a huge circle of people out there who believe that coilovers are the fastest way to go. It's not. Go right to the manufacturer, buy that one specific thing that you don't even need to tune because it's been built exactly for what you're racing, okay? And then you don't have to worry about it. Good to go. And probably it'll cost you less money because you're also paying an added amount of money on top of the price of regular springs and Bilsteins because you're getting the adjustability factor. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts there. Of course, the manufacturing cost is going to be higher. I don't like them. You don't need them. But yeah, okay, I think we're going to move on. I'm really using up time here. Paul Sexton, glad you're with us. I have a thing I want to show everybody. This was a really cool thing that happened. There is something to be said for uniqueness in the motorsport world. For those of you who don't know Paul Sexton, he is out there racing, I can't even say it without laughing, he's out there racing a bright red Toyota Prius. It is the antithesis of motorsport. It is the devil's commuter car, no doubt. So let's talk about it for just a second. This cool thing happened to show up in the mail the other day, and I know it's going to be backwards because, Facebook Live flips everything, which means I wrote this up here backwards so that you could read it. You're welcome about that. But Paul, this was really cool. I don't have Grassroots Motorsport Magazine in my neck of the woods that I can pick up at a newsstand or whatever. So Paul, he messaged me. He was like, dude, check this out. And he sent me a picture, totally featured in Grassroots Motorsport Magazine. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like Paul signed this, which means I'm going to have to frame it, hang on to it for several years until he's famous, and then sell it for, I don't know, $150,000, I'm thinking. Pocket change, kind of stuff like that. So that was really cool. Really neat excerpt in here, too. He says, things about racing, Paul Sexton things, Bridgestones, plus he gets help from Racers HQ. Yeah, he does, buddy. Pleased to have you on the team. Great job using this uniqueness to your advantage. I'm so excited to see how things work out for you. Oh, 1 of 1, a limited edition. Oh my gosh, this is priceless. Paul Sexton says, yep, it's the only one he's ever signed. $3 million. Start the bidding right now. Send me an email if you want to buy that for $3 million. Eric Brush, awesome job writing backwards. Man, Eric, I don't know if you saw the first episode, but I wrote a ton of stuff up here. Actually took my iPad over and wrote a bunch of stuff up, and it was all backwards, and people were like, I can't read it. So actually wrote everything backwards. It was a real ride, I'll tell you. Okay, check this out. Let's move on here. I'm just talking way too much here. Okay, let's move on to our third question today. This is from Shelby Evans. We've been emailing back and forth a little bit here. I was kind of hoping he'd be on. I invited him. I haven't seen him yet. If you're on, Shelby, make sure you say hello so I can shout you out, my man. Okay, his question. And I imagine, I don't know this for sure, but I kind of imagine it's because he's in the Northeast or in the northern parts where you don't have a long racing season. He says, would indoor karting against the clock help improve racing techniques? Good question. He says, I know I should aim for neutral steer. How will I feel it while karting? Oh, I love how do I do this questions. Those are my favorite ones. I love tactical stuff. Let's do this. First of all, I love indoor karting. It has this weird stigma where it's like, oh, it's not actually racing, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, no, it totally is. And one of my favorite things about indoor karting is you're normally on a polished concrete surface, which radically decreases the amount of grip you can have. And that makes the driving much more fun, even though you're at a lower speed. But you're definitely be able to slide the car around a lot, so you're going to actually learn a lot of things. Now, he wants to know about rotation. I've been talking about rotation a ton lately. Let me go here, and it was what was it? Hang on, bear with me. I'm going to look this up right now. I know there was an awesome podcast episode we did about rotation. I think it was episode 21 on the podcast. And no, it was 28, episode 28, racershq.com slash what? Podcast 28. Yeah, go there. Rotation's amazing. You need to know it if you want to separate yourself from everyone else. As far as karting goes, it's a little bit different because normally when you're rotating a car, you have the suspension to deal with, right? And that's a massive component in rotating a vehicle is manipulating weight in a certain way so that you can get the car rotated into the corner. Love that stuff. But what do you do on a kart? There's essentially no weight transfer for this, for all intents and purposes for this conversation, right? How do you get the car to rotate? Interesting. Well, another really cool thing that applies to karting that does not apply to normal cars is that the front end and the rear end are completely separate. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that in a normal car, you can't use turning input and braking input at the same time. Because when you do that and you do too much of it, it actually shifts a ton of weight to the front and overloads the front wheels, or the front tires, and it just decreases the amount of potential traction that you can potentially have going into the corner. So the cool thing about karts is that you can do all the turning you want and you can do all the braking you want because most indoor karts and most karts in general only have rear brakes. So braking the car shifts no weight because there's no weight to shift. And you can't slow the front tires down because they're only connected to the rear, which is awesome. So in this particular case, to get the car to rotate, you're going to have to do a thing that's called trail braking. Raise your hand if you know what trail braking is. I do. All right. Why do I do stuff like that? I don't know. Okay, so trail braking is interesting because in a normal car with suspension, you would normally turn the car in and drag the brakes a little bit so that you can lift the rear end enough to help it slide out a little. No problems there. In a kart, it's a little bit different because you can drag the brakes as long as you want, which means you can brake probably later than you think you can, right? But as you're going into the corner, you're dragging the brakes, and that's slowing the rear tires down more than it is. How do I explain? It's slowing the rear tires down more than the driving surface is moving past the cart. So essentially, it's a little bit like pulling the e-brake in a car, and you know that's going to cause rotation. So having the slick, polished concrete surface, as well as only rear brakes, is an awesome way to learn how to rotate a car without having to worry about weight manipulation yet. By the way, there's an awesome weight manipulation podcast. It just came out, racershq.com/podcast38. Really extensive. We talked about manipulating weight in the car to drive like a pro racer. Really interesting stuff. So I would say absolutely, yeah, indoor karting. That's if you can do it, it's worth $1 million. Just go spend an afternoon at kart racing, and don't worry about time. Just worry about braking a little later than you think you need to, and feeling the cart starting to step in the rear, and it happens so fast in a kart because the wheelbase is so short. It's either good, sort of good, sweet spot, it's gone. Okay, so I mean, learning in something with a short wheelbase is going to really boost your potential in a real car, because in a real car, everything slows down way more. You have a longer wheelbase. You have to wait for the weight to shift from the center position off to the sweet spot where it stops moving, the tires start gripping everything, and it's just way slower. So in karting, it happens much faster. So if you can master it in a kart with just rear brakes on a polished concrete surface, man, you're really going to be onto something for sure. So great question, Shelvian. Always be thinking about neutral steer. I'm going to put on a bonus tip. Here's the one thing I want you to take away from tonight if you got nothing else. I want you to stop thinking about the accelerator, the brake pedal, the steering wheel, and sometimes the clutch as things that slow the car, make the car go faster, or turn the car, right? I want you to start thinking about them as tools to manipulate weight. You're only on 3 wheels cornering in a kart too. Yeah, thank you, Jake, for adding that. I imagine that also decreases your potential traction being on 3 wheels as well. So start thinking about in terms of weight manipulation, because there are 2 things that separate pro racers from everyone else, and it's their knowledge of manipulating weight to get the car to do what they want and mastering rotation. Which is really interesting, I think, because people just tend to overlook a lot of these foundations, and they want to just jump right in. Marty Davis has asked, trail braking, are you taking your foot off the accelerator while lightly braking? Oh, that's a great question. I guess you could, in a kart, you're in rear drive with rear brakes, so doing both at the same time wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense, because they're just really fighting each other. If you're, now we can get a little technical, I guess. If you're in a 2-stroke, maybe, because it takes those things a while to spool up. I can tell you, you're definitely going to wear out stuff a lot faster if you do it. I probably wouldn't worry about about overlapping those in a kart unless you're at like the last 2% of potential gain. So yeah, I wouldn't have any qualms with taking the foot off the accelerator as you're going into the braking zone, getting the car slowed down. You're turning in, and maybe coming off the brakes a little bit. Depending on pretty much everything, to get the car rotated. Once the car starts rotating, and you might want to have to anticipate this a little bit, but and you may even want to come back on the throttle before the kart is like in the rotation sweet spot, because using the brakes to start the rotation isn't going to keep the rotation going. So you want to come back in the throttle as soon as possible to carry that all the way through the corner. And that's the difference between pros and grassroots guys, is they know how to maximize grip at the corner entry with rotation, and then they know how to keep the rotation going by making small adjustments to the wheel and the throttle. So really interesting stuff there. So, man, okay, so we've gone over a little bit here, no problem. I want to give everyone one last chance to, if you have anything that you've been thinking about that you think might be helpful, or if you got a question here, something about everything we talked about. We talked about the aerodynamics in autocross. We talked about tire pressures, no problem, Marty, at your service. We talked about adjusting coilovers and staying away from them because I think they're ridiculous. And of course, we just talked about neutral steering a kart as well. One more thing I wanted to add about the Lexan spoilers in autocross. I definitely should have added this. The thing about the Classic American Muscle class and thinking about aero is that aerodynamics are used to gain more downforce. You know what I mean? It works. It absolutely works at higher levels with faster speeds, okay? But in a heavy car, doing the speeds you'll see in autocross, I don't think there's that much more to gain. Your car's already pretty heavy, right? But if you're taking a Formula SAE, a little kart, it's like a little open wheel racer or whatever, those things are only like, I don't know, 500-600 pounds. Yeah, you put a spoiler on the back of one of those and a splitter on the front. Yeah, you might actually make something. So it all depends on what you got in there. So that's happening as well. So I just want to make sure I didn't want to give the spoiler too bad of a rap. There is a place for it, but probably not on cam cars. I probably wouldn't even put one on a Miata, quite honestly. I've seen them. A lot of guys run the Miatas, with spoilers and all the modified classes. Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. You know what that's called? That's called monkey visioning. When you're just doing what everyone else is doing rather than figuring out if it's actually the right thing to do. Here's a great example. You ever seen people spray water on their tires at the autocross event? It's funny, like it never fails. Everyone's watching, tires warming up, everybody's looking around, and then the fast guy gets his sprayer out and sprays it, and then everybody else starts doing it. That's called monkey visioning, right? I've never had to spray tires in autocross ever. I don't think it's necessary. The people who are spraying their tires, I'm going to keep going on this because I think it's important. The people who are spraying their tires, they have no idea how hot the tires are when they're spraying them. They don't know the manufacturer's recommendation for optimal temperature range for performance, you know? So without those two pieces of information, they're literally just guessing about how to make their tires better, you know? And I say all the time, guessing is the same thing as hoping, and we know that hoping is not a winning strategy in racing. So avoid the monkey vision thing if you possibly can. I know we've had Jake Reel has put on several comments here. I'm pleased to have you here, Jake. It's nice to see you. He's the producer of the Rags to Races podcast over on iTunes for free. And Jake has recently started writing for RacersHQ.com. He wrote a beautiful piece about the Briggs LO206 racing cart. He just bought one, and I'll tell you what, Jake's a great writer, a lot of insight, and within 2 days of that post going up, it became the most shared article in Racers HQ history. So pleased to have you along, Jake. Yep. All right, on. Oh, Chase Helm, a pyrometer helps with that. Yes, we talked about pyrometers, I think, in session 2, and glad you brought that up. If you want to cool your tires down in autocross, the pyrometer is the way to go, because if you spray tires on something without knowing the temperature, you're just wasting time and effort. Just get your little, it's called a digital pyrometer. Just shoot it real quick, a little laser beam at the tire. It'll tell you the temperature instantly, and you can go from there. Some Miata drivers are torn between running with the top up or top down, slightly better aero versus slightly better weight distribution. What's your insight on it? I don't think there is any difference whatsoever, my man. I just don't think that people are thinking about it, or they're overthinking it too much. Like 9 out of those 10 drivers who throw the top down to get that advantage also have the fake roll bar that they put behind the rear seat, and I mean like, why are you thinking about one thing and not the other? So I wouldn't worry about it. I think people get a little too wrapped up in the little things, and I do know it's true. I know all the little things do add up, but the little things are only worth the last few points of percentage, so it's the big things you really got to crush. But great question. No one ever asked me that before. I think that was Calvin. I can only see the bottom half of his graphic, and it looks like his Mustang, but I can't see the name because the posts are going up too fast. So, all right, again, this is your last chance to put in a question. If you don't get to put one in here and you think of one later, racershq.com/ask. Pleased to have everybody along. Thanks for joining me. We're going to do this again next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's one of my favorite things I get to do. So make sure you put me in something so I can talk about it next week. And thanks for joining me, guys. We'll talk to y'all soon.